At 3 in the morning, my daughter-in-law slammed my head into the floor and forced a pen into my hand. My son just stood there. I had caught them draining my retirement, forging documents. They wanted the house, too. I signed. With a shoulder out of place and pride torn open, I promised myself one thing. I would not stay silent. 1 month later, in front of the town hall and 300 witnesses, I kept that promise. What happens when the quiet woman rises and no longer shields the ones who chose to betray her? By the time I heard the doorknob rattle, I was already half awake. I had lived alone long enough to recognize every creak of this old beach house, every shift in the walls when the wind pressed in from the Gulf. But that wasn't wind. It was 3 a.m. The first slam didn't break the door, just shook the frame. The second cracked the lock. The third threw the door wide open. Marissa stood there, her hair wild, eyes lit up like a fuse had gone off in her head. And behind her, just in the shadows, stood my son, Patrick. I didn't scream. I didn't get up. I didn't even speak. Marissa walked straight toward my bed, fist clenched, barefoot on the hardwood. Her mouth moved first. Her words were hot, rushed, splattered with rage. Something about how I was ungrateful, how I had humiliated her, how I had no right to question her authority over family finances. Her voice twisted around words like authority and disrespect and loyalty, like she was performing for someone. But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking for him, for Patrick, the man she married, the boy I raised. The punch landed before I even fully sat up. My face went sideways into the pillow. My left shoulder jarred hard against the bedpost. The pain shot through my body like a match to dry grass. She climbed onto the bed, knee to my ribcage. My lungs screamed for air but stayed quiet. Her hands went for my nightstand drawer, pulled out the manila folder I had tucked there, the one with the bank printouts, the one with the proof. I had known she might find it eventually. What I didn't expect was that she would come with fists, and that my son would come with silence. I looked over his shoulder as she tore through the pages, looking for the worst of it. The line that showed the automatic transfers. My retirement payments split in half. Hers in every month. My name removed as beneficiary from the backup annuity. All signed under my name, but in handwriting that wasn't mine. She held up the paper like it was evidence in her favor. She said I was unstable. She said I was trying to break apart her marriage. She said I had memory issues and needed to be placed somewhere safe, like a facility, somewhere quiet, somewhere cheap. Patrick still didn't move. He didn't blink when I bled from my mouth. He didn't flinch when I called his name. He didn't say a word when she yanked the sheet off my body and dragged me toward the kitchen, screaming that I was going to sign the house over tonight or she would do it for me. I stumbled, fell. My knees cracked against the tile. I didn't fight her, but I didn't say yes. And that's when she kicked me, right between my ribs. I didn't remember pressing the button, but I had set it up weeks ago. The SOS app, synced to a cloud account, auto-activating the mic and GPS with one tap, a built-in emergency trigger, for moments like this. The red light blinked once before it dimmed, silent, watching, listening. Somewhere in the corner of the room, Patrick whispered her name. Marissa. Just once. But she ignored him. I saw the edge of my phone under the chair. She didn't see it. I tasted blood and salt water and old grief. And then, as if summoned by something greater than law, a knock came at the door. A heavy, slow, authoritative knock. Ray, the security guard. Marissa froze. Patrick stepped back. I laid there, trembling, one side of my face cold against the tile. The vases rattled, the window blinds swayed, the whole house was holding its breath. Ray's voice called out, Said he was doing a wellness check. Marissa smoothed her hair. Patrick pulled his sleeves down. They opened the door like nothing had happened, told him I'd tripped in the dark, that they were helping me back to bed. Ray looked down at me. Our eyes locked. He saw the blood. He saw the trembling. He didn't believe a word of it. He nodded anyway, told them to have a good night, and then he left. And just like that, they did too. A few minutes later, the front door shut. I laid there for what felt like years. Then I crawled back to my room. I picked up the folder, torn, but not destroyed. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked out toward the ocean. My jaw ached, my chest throbbed, my face burned. But I wasn't broken. I was awake. If you're still listening, thank you. Some of you might know what it feels like when someone you raised stops seeing you as a mother and starts treating you like a liability. But by the end of that day, I promised myself one thing. I wasn't going to disappear quietly, and neither were they. I didn't sleep again that night. My left shoulder throbbed every time I moved. My side was raw where the kick had landed, but none of that compared to the hollow ache behind my ribs. Not the pain of injury, the pain of knowing the person I gave life to had watched me nearly lose mine and didn't even blink. By 5:30, I was fully dressed, navy slacks, long-sleeve blouse to cover the bruises, sensible shoes. I didn't need anyone's pity. I needed to move, before they did. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Gloria Reyes. She picked up after the first ring. I told her I needed to call an emergency HOA meeting by noon. No delays, no postponements. Gloria didn't ask why. She didn't hesitate. She said she'd send the mass text and book the community center. The second call was to Celeste Moreno, retired judge, sharp as a tack, old friend from the library book club. The one person in my life who had seen through Marissa's polished facade from the beginning. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I told her I had something she needed to hear, in person. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Not for food. I just needed to keep moving. The hum of the motor soothed something in me. I rinsed a coffee mug, filled it, held it in both hands to calm the tremble. By the time Celeste arrived, I had already gathered the folder, the printed bank statements, and the photos I took of the bruises. I handed her my phone, told her to press play. She sat in my living room, listened, still as stone. She didn't flinch when Marissa's voice poured out of the speaker, didn't interrupt when Patrick's silence settled like dust between the screams, didn't even blink when she heard the sound of my body hitting the floor. When the recording ended, she set the phone down slowly. "You're going to need a lawyer," she said, "and not just for protection, for offense." I told her I didn't want to drag it into court yet, not if there was a way to make it clear to everyone what had happened, not if I could speak first. She nodded. "I'll make a call," she said. Elder law, local, aggressive. 15 minutes later, she handed me a name. Phyllis Hart. Said she'd already texted her to expect me later that day. But first, we had something else to do. We needed proof, not just of the recording. That was powerful. But we needed fresh documentation. Photos, medical notes, neutral third parties. I drove myself to the urgent care clinic near the marina. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to get the examination started. They took photos, measured swelling, noted tenderness in the ribs. The physician didn't ask for details. She just wrote everything down, printed it out, handed me the copy. I left without making another appointment. By 10 a.m., I was back home, sitting with Celeste again, sipping the now cold coffee. Gloria texted. "Meeting confirmed for 12:30. Full attendance expected. People were curious." I printed 3 sets of the statements showing the transfers. highlighted the line where Marissa's account received half of my monthly pension every month for 6 months, circled the part where my name had been changed on the beneficiary forms. I did it all with a steady hand. I wasn't angry anymore, not the kind that boils and explodes. This was colder, cleaner. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was taking back the room they thought they owned. At 11:45, I called Rain Gwen, the security guard. I told him what had happened. I told him there might be camera footage from the front gate that night. He said he'd already pulled the logs. Said something felt wrong the moment he left my house. Said he was saving the footage in case I needed it. I told him to bring a copy. Quietly. He said he would. By noon, I had everything in one folder. Recording backed up, hard copy of medical report, printed bank statements, HOA rules on financial abuse, elder protection, and residential violence. Celeste looked it over and nodded. "You're not going to break down in there," she said. I said, "Not even close." She smiled. "Let them try," she said. At 12:28, we walked into the Sarasota Shores Community Hall. The lights were on, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, the podium at the front, the same room where we used to host potlucks, book drives, donation fundraisers for hurricane relief. Now it would host something else, something honest. I took my seat in the second row, not at the front, not in the back. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't grandstanding either. Gloria walked in 2 minutes later and gave me a subtle nod. The room filled quickly. Most faces I recognized. A few I didn't. But everyone knew who I was. And everyone knew who Patrick and Marissa were. They weren't here yet. But they would come. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The community hall filled up faster than I expected. By the time the clock struck 12:30, there were barely any seats left. Most of the attendees were familiar faces. Women I had known from book clubs, retired couples from down the block, a few young families who had recently moved into the neighborhood. There were also a handful of strangers, likely brought in by the whisper chain. Bad news travels fast. And this, I supposed, had all the makings of something scandalous. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Gloria adjusted the microphone at the podium. She greeted everyone with her usual calm, thanked them for showing up on such short notice, and said we'd begin in just a few minutes. Her tone was neutral but clipped. No warmth, no unnecessary smiles. She knew why we were here. So did everyone else. I kept my eyes forward. Celeste sat beside me, legs crossed, hands folded on top of her purse. She hadn't spoken much since we left the house. But her silence wasn't discomfort. It was anticipation. She was giving me the space I needed. At exactly 12:34, the side doors creaked open. Marissa walked in first. She wore a white blazer over a beige pencil skirt, hair blown out, makeup freshly applied. Her heels clicked against the linoleum as if she owned the room. Right behind her was Patrick. His expression was unreadable. He didn't look at me as they passed. They sat 2 rows behind me. I felt it more than I saw it. That weight, that certainty that the trap had been baited, and they had stepped right into it. Gloria tapped the mic again and called the meeting to order. She welcomed everyone to what she referred to as an emergency assembly of the Sarasota Shores HOA. She reminded the room that this gathering was not for gossip or personal attacks, but rather a space for residents to share concerns about safety and well-being in the community. She looked at me. I stood up and walked slowly to the front. No script, no dramatics, just truth. I turned to face the room, then paused. It had been a long time since I had stood in front of people like that. Not since my last year teaching. Not since I had stood at a podium and tried to help someone younger understand the weight of their own voice. Now it was my turn to use mine. I told them I had been assaulted. I told them it happened in my own home. I told them I had evidence. Then I played the recording. No introduction, no explanation, just one tap of my phone screen, and the sound of violence filled the room. Marissa's voice exploded out of the tiny speaker, laced with venom. Her threats, her accusations, her demand that I sign over my home, her plan to put me in a facility I had never agreed to, the impact of the strike. My gasp, the sound of me hitting the ground. The silence in the hall was thick. Then came Patrick's voice, soft, passive, just a whisper of her name. Then nothing. Nothing while I cried, nothing while I struggled for breath, nothing while she dragged me across the floor. When the audio stopped, I looked around. Some people stared at the floor, some stared at Marissa, most stared at me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I opened it carefully, laying each page on the table. First, the medical report from the clinic that morning. Diagnoses: bruised ribs, facial contusions, swelling in the shoulder joint. Photographs included. Next, the bank statements. 6 months' worth, each one showing a monthly transfer of funds from my pension account to Marissa's. Nearly $2,000. No authorization from me. No notice. Just gone. Then came the final piece. A printout of the altered annuity form. My name removed as primary beneficiary, hers inserted, forged signature below. Still, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just stood and let the facts do the talking. A few people in the audience began whispering. Someone let out a quiet curse. Gloria returned to the mic. She confirmed that everything I presented had been reviewed privately beforehand by 2 board members and by Celeste, who still carried weight in this town. Before anyone could speak, another figure entered from the side door. Ray. He nodded once in my direction and handed Gloria a USB stick. She plugged it into the projector behind the podium. A grainy black and white security feed came up. It showed the front of my house at 2:57 a.m. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it. Marissa entering, Patrick standing just behind her. The door closing. Nothing else. Then, 22 minutes later, they left. Ray had included the audio log from his body cam when he knocked. The video showed him standing on my porch. The brief conversation with Marissa. Her smile. Her lie that I had simply tripped. That she and Patrick were helping me back to bed. The video ended. No one spoke. Marissa shifted in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap. Patrick stared straight ahead. Then slowly she stood up. She tried to smile, said it was a misunderstanding, that tensions had been high, that I had been confused, that sometimes people at my age forgot things, that perhaps the audio wasn't what it seemed, that maybe I had fallen, and she was just trying to help. She looked around, seeking validation. She got none. I looked at her, then back at the crowd. Then I said, just one sentence. That is what silence looks like when it is weaponized. Then I sat down. Gloria thanked me. The meeting was adjourned. As I stood to leave, Celeste touched my arm. You did what needed to be done, she said. I nodded. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Marissa's smile didn't last long. She stood there with the whole room watching, trying to stitch together control with tone and posture. But the thread was fraying fast. She cleared her throat again, repeated the word misunderstanding like it might soften what everyone had just heard. Then she looked at me. I didn't blink. She turned to the crowd and said I had always been sensitive, that I misunderstood her intentions, that I had fallen, and in my confusion, assumed the worst. She said she was trying to help, that I had overreacted, and the recording lacked context. She apologized if anything sounded out of place, but insisted it was all a terrible mix-up. I didn't speak. She kept talking. The more she spoke, the tighter her sentences became, like she was trying to trap the air before it could escape. Her voice got thin. Her eyes scanned the audience, searching for someone to nod, but no one did. Not even Patrick. He sat still, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His mouth stayed closed. Celeste stood quietly, letting the tension settle before she moved. Then she walked up, plugged in the USB Ray had given her, and turned on the projector again. The screen lit up with black and white security footage from the main gate. Timestamp, 2:56 a.m. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Marissa's car entered through the residential gate. Patrick sat in the passenger seat. The gate closed behind them. Cut to the front porch camera. Same timestamp. Marissa approaching the front door, alone at first. Then Patrick behind her. She knocked. The door opened. They stepped inside. The camera didn't capture what happened in the hallway, but it captured how long they were there. 22 minutes later they exited. Marissa's blouse was untucked, her expression tense. Patrick looked down as he walked out. Then came the audio, Ray's voice through his body cam. "Knock at the door." Marissa opened it. Her calm voice explaining that I had tripped and fallen, that she was helping me settle, that everything was fine. The video ended. The silence was louder this time. I walked to the front. No dramatic pause, no raised voice. I laid 3 more documents on the table in front of me. The first was the printed log from the home security app. It showed the SOS signal had been activated at 3:01 a.m. The microphone began recording automatically. The GPS pinged emergency contacts. The alert was never cancelled. The second was the updated power of attorney Marissa had tried to file 2 weeks ago without my consent. The one Phyllis had intercepted. It had my forged signature and her name listed as sole medical and financial agent. That document never went through because of a missing witness signature. But the attempt was clear. The third was a printed summary of the account changes to my retirement fund. Beneficiary name altered. Auto transfers scheduled. Each change dated and matched to timestamps showing logins from Marissa's IP address. I did not accuse. I did not explain. I just stood there while Gloria took the mic. She said the board would now open the floor to any statements from community members. A man from the third row stood up. He said his mother had been through something similar in a different state, that it started with access to her phone, then her passwords, and ended with her house being sold out from under her. He said what I had done today was brave. A woman from the back said she remembered seeing Marissa pick up mail from my box more than once. She thought maybe it was a favor. Now she wasn't so sure. Then a neighbor from across the street said he'd heard yelling at odd hours the past month. Not from my voice, from someone else, someone younger. He had assumed it was the television. Another voice mentioned they had noticed Patrick's name missing from recent school newsletters, suggesting maybe his position on the board was quietly being reviewed. The room didn't spiral. It didn't become chaos. It became clear. Marissa said nothing more. She picked up her purse, grabbed Patrick's wrist, whispered something sharp into his ear. He didn't respond. She turned and started walking toward the exit. But the door opened first. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Not rushing, not yelling, just moving with calm certainty. One officer spoke to Gloria. She nodded and pointed toward Marissa. They approached her carefully, asked her to step aside. She began protesting, said she had done nothing wrong, that this was harassment, that she was being targeted, that everything had been twisted. The officer said they had received multiple statements and audio evidence. They had enough to bring her in for questioning under suspicion of elder abuse and financial exploitation. She would not be handcuffed unless she resisted. Her voice rose. Her words lost structure. She turned to Patrick. Said something I didn't catch. Patrick stood. slowly, but he didn't move toward her. He didn't speak. He just stared at the floor. The officer asked again. She didn't resist, but she didn't go quietly. Her shoes tapped hard against the tile as she walked out, flanked by both officers. One neighbor stood, then another, then half the room. They didn't cheer, but they nodded, quiet, firm, like something had snapped back into place. Patrick remained seated, then Gloria stepped up again. She said this meeting would be formally concluded and documented, that the HOA would issue a written statement about the safety and legal rights of all residents, especially elders, that any resident under investigation for financial or physical harm would be temporarily suspended from all board positions. Then she thanked me. I didn't reply. I returned to my seat, picked up my folder, sat in silence while the room slowly emptied. Patrick walked past me without a word. Celeste sat beside me. She didn't touch my hand or offer comfort. She didn't need to. We both knew. This was far from over. But something irreversible had just happened. And this time, it was them who couldn't hide. The next morning came colder than expected. Florida winters don't have much bite, but that morning, the air carried a strange chill. I felt it before I stepped outside. Not from the weather, but from the stillness. Like something had shifted, not just in me, but around me. Something irreversible. By 7, I had already received 2 voicemails and 3 emails. One from the local police department confirming Marissa's detainment for overnight processing. One from Phyllis Hart saying she would begin proceedings to petition for a formal restraining order. And one from Gloria, letting me know the HOA would release a written summary of yesterday's meeting, and that it would include a formal condemnation of elder abuse, financial fraud, and harassment among family members within the community. It felt surreal, not because it was happening, but because it had taken this long. The morning news didn't mention names, but they mentioned the incident. A woman from a prominent Sarasota family had been brought in on suspicion of physical assault and financial misconduct involving an elderly relative. No charges filed yet, still under investigation. But the buzz had begun. By midday, I had a call from the principal at the high school where Patrick worked. He was being placed on administrative leave, not because of what he had done, but because of what he hadn't. They had reviewed the audio, the same audio that played in the community hall, the voice that stayed silent while I cried, while I begged, while I was dragged. It wasn't the yelling that bothered them, it was the absence of response. The school board couldn't risk keeping him in a leadership role while the story developed. That afternoon, a silver sedan pulled into my driveway. I recognized it immediately. Patrick stepped out. No tie, shirt wrinkled, eyes sunken. I didn't invite him in. He stood at the base of my porch steps, hands in his pockets, rocking on his heels like a teenager who knew he had already failed the test but showed up anyway. He started talking, not loudly, not with anger, just words that came heavy and hesitant. He said things were complicated, that he hadn't known what to do, that Marissa had been under stress, that he didn't think it would go that far, that he thought I could handle myself, that he didn't expect me to go public. He said the school was wrong to suspend him. He said I had humiliated him. I said nothing. He kept going. He asked if I would consider talking to the district, letting them know I didn't want to press anything further, that this had gotten out of hand, that a quiet resolution would be better for everyone. I looked at him, not past him, at him. He didn't flinch, not yet. Then I said one thing. You stood there. His lips parted, but I kept going. You stood there and watched while she hit me, while she dragged me, while she lied to my face and to yours. You didn't lift a hand. You didn't say my name. You didn't stop her. You stood there. He tried to interrupt. I didn't let him. You don't get to come here and ask for quiet. He looked down. The rocking stopped. Then he said he had nowhere else to go, that Marissa's parents had closed their doors, that the legal bills were starting to grow, that reporters had started calling. He said he didn't know where to start fixing things. I said that was not my problem, and I closed the door. It didn't slam. It didn't rattle. It closed like truth. Soft. Final. The following week, Phyllis filed the restraining order paperwork. The court approved it within 3 days. Marissa was barred from contacting me directly or indirectly. Any access to financial accounts connected to me was revoked. Meanwhile, the state began a formal investigation into the fraudulent pension transfers. Marissa's fingerprints matched the altered forms. The evidence from Ray, from the security system, from the SOS recordings, from my medical report, all lined up. They offered her a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and a formal admission of guilt. She declined. She hired a new attorney and started talking about defamation, about countersuits. But the court didn't care for threats. By the end of that month, the charges were filed. Elder abuse, financial fraud, attempted coercion. 1 count for every unauthorized transfer, 1 count for physical assault. Patrick wasn't charged with anything criminal, but the school board made its decision final. He lost his position, lost the recommendation for his next teaching job, lost the endorsement from the professional board. His silence had spoken too loudly. Marissa's social accounts vanished. Their Christmas letter never came that year. Their front lawn remained undecorated. Some neighbors said they moved out of town. Others said they still lived in the next neighborhood over, just no longer spoke to anyone. I didn't care either way. I didn't follow up. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about consequence. It was about taking up space again, space they had tried to erase me from. In February, the community center invited me to speak at a seminar about elder financial protection. I declined, but I sent them a folder. Inside were the documents I had used, the audio script I had read, the screenshots and printouts, and 1 line handwritten at the bottom: "Protect your voice before someone else uses it against you." Then I closed the folder, and finally, I opened the windows. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, that mix of sterile and stale, the kind you only notice when time moves slowly. A plastic plant sat dying in the corner, its leaves stiff with dust. The guard at the desk checked my ID without looking me in the eye, then told me to wait until they called my name. I had not come here out of curiosity. I had come for something final. When they called me, I followed a woman in uniform down a long hallway. The walls were off-white and cracked in places. The linoleum floor had scuff marks that never quite disappeared, no matter how often someone tried to polish them. We stopped outside a small room. "She's already inside," the officer said. "You'll have 10 minutes." I nodded. The door opened. Marissa sat on the other side of a thick pane of glass. She wore the county jumpsuit, but her hair was still neat, pulled into a tight bun at the nape of her neck. Her nails were bare, no polish. Her hands were folded tightly on the table. She looked up as I entered, but not with surprise. She had expected me. I sat down slowly. The chair was colder than I thought it would be. She didn't speak right away. Her eyes scanned my face. I wondered if she was looking for damage, for scars, for proof of what she had done. Or perhaps she was searching for something else. A crack, a softness. She would find none. When she did speak, her voice was lower than I remembered, less sharp, less certain. She said it had all gotten out of hand, that people had turned things into something bigger than it was, that this didn't need to go any further, that I had made my point, that if I stopped pushing, she could move on. Patrick could move on. We could forget this. She could rebuild. She could take care of things. Quietly. She looked at me like she was doing me a favor. I looked at her the way you look at someone you no longer recognize. Then I leaned forward. I said her name once. She blinked. I told her she had made a choice. I told her she had come into my home, laid her hands on me, spat lies into my face, and then stood behind the silence of my son as if it were her shield. I told her she had laughed when I bled. I told her she forged my name on documents that were never hers to touch, that she drained money I had worked decades to earn, that she sat beside me at dinners while she stole from my accounts. I told her she had taken her time doing it. It wasn't one moment. It was a pattern, a slow build, a method. She didn't flinch, but she didn't fight either. She just looked at me. And then I said the last thing I had come to say. You are not coming back from this. Her fingers twitched. I didn't say it with cruelty. I said it with clarity. Because the truth was, this wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about prison. It was about removal, about extraction, about cutting the infection so cleanly from the body that it no longer left a shadow. She didn't cry. I didn't expect her to. She asked if Patrick still had a key to the house. I said no. She nodded like that mattered. Then she asked why I had come. I told her it wasn't for closure. It wasn't for forgiveness. It wasn't to see her suffer. It was to make sure she heard it. From me, not from court documents, not from attorneys, not from reporters or neighbors or internet threads, from the woman she had underestimated, from the woman she had tried to erase, from the woman who stood up again. Then the officer tapped on the glass. Time was up. I stood. My knees ached, but I didn't rush. Marissa didn't say goodbye. Neither did I. When I stepped back into the sunlight, I squinted. The air was warmer now, less sharp. The wind carried the smell of grass and distant traffic. I walked to my car, opened the door, and paused for just a second before sliding into the seat. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't rethink what I said. There was nothing left unsaid. That night, I slept with the windows open. The air moved freely through the house, no locks checked twice, no hallway lights left on, no chair braced under the doorknob. Just me and the sound of wind pushing against the curtains. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like presence, like something I had taken back and wasn't planning to lose again. He showed up at dusk. I had just finished watering the orchids on the back porch. The sky was a quiet lavender, clouds streaked with gold. I heard his car before I saw it. Same silver sedan, parked farther down the street this time, not in the driveway, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come closer. I didn't go inside. I stayed on the porch and waited. Patrick stepped out of the car, hands empty. He walked slowly like someone moving through fog, shoulders low, hair longer than usual, shirt untucked. When he reached the bottom step, he stopped. Didn't ask to come up, just stood there, staring at the floorboards. I said nothing. He cleared his throat, told me he had been thinking a lot, that things had gotten worse than anyone expected, that he hadn't come to explain. He had come to listen. I didn't respond. He looked up, said he remembered the time I had sprained my ankle during a hurricane warning, how I had crawled halfway up the stairs before he got home from school, how I had refused to call an ambulance, how I told him we don't panic in this house. We prepare. He smiled, barely. Then he said he hadn't been prepared. Not for any of this. Not for how quickly it all spiraled. Not for how clearly people had chosen their sides. He said he felt like he had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his home, his name. I told him he hadn't lost anything. He had surrendered it. One decision at a time. He looked away, said he didn't know how to fix it. I said he couldn't. Not this. Not with words, not with time. not with tears. He said he missed coming to Sunday dinners, missed the smell of rosemary bread and baked chicken, missed the way I always set the table with real cloth napkins, even when it was just the three of us. He said he kept thinking about the moment in the hallway, the moment he heard me cry out, and the part of him that froze. I asked if he remembered what he was wearing that night. He looked confused. I said I did. A grey button-down, brown belt, watch on the right wrist. I remembered everything because I saw all of it when he didn't move. He shifted, said he was sorry, said he didn't know what else to say, said he hadn't wanted to choose. I told him silence is still a choice, and he chose her. I told him he chose her over the woman who carried him through 18 hours of labour, over the woman who scraped together rent while studying for night classes, over the woman who stitched his Halloween costumes by hand and sat through every parent-teacher conference and baked sale and school recital, even when she was exhausted and overwhelmed, over the woman who gave him space to fail, time to grow, room to change. He chose to let her hurt me. He said he didn't think it would get physical. I said that wasn't the point. He let it happen. And then he left. He asked what I wanted him to do. I said I didn't want anything, not from him, not anymore. He asked if he could come in, just for a moment, to sit, to breathe, to remember. I said no, not yet, maybe not ever. He asked if that was it, if this was how it ended. I said it had already ended, back in that hallway, with his silence. He nodded, stepped back, told me he understood, said he wasn't proud of who he had become, but he still wanted to be someone I could recognize again. I said he would have to do that on his own, without me, without my house, without my money, without my forgiveness. He stood there for a long moment, eyes rimmed red, shoulders shaking. But he didn't cry, not fully, just a breath caught in the throat of a man who had used his voice too late. Then he turned around, walked back to his car, didn't look back, didn't say goodbye. I watched the taillights fade down the street, swallowed by the turn at the corner. The porch light buzzed faintly above me. The orchids swayed in the soft wind, and I realized I had never felt more alone. But not in the way I used to, not in fear, not in doubt, just in space, open, widened, undisturbed. Later that night I made myself tea, sat in the living room with the lights low, and I didn't cry, not because there wasn't grief, but because there was nothing left to grieve. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. The house felt quieter the next morning, not the kind of quiet that follows grief. I had known that kind of silence before. After my father's funeral, after the divorce, after nights when Patrick would sneak out to avoid hearing another fight between me and Harold. That quiet had always been heavy, like walking through molasses, sticky, slow, suffocating. But this quiet was different. It was still, clean. I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely crested the hill behind the oak trees, and the backyard shimmered in dew. I stood at the window with my cup of black coffee, watching the squirrels dart between the branches. There was something peaceful about their movements. No hesitation, no shame, just motion. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the notebook I hadn't touched since the hospital. The first few pages were filled with scribbles, random words, names of lawyers, insurance numbers, appointments, notes I had made in the weeks when everything blurred. Then, halfway through, I found a clean page. I wrote the date, and I wrote 2 words. I'm still. It wasn't a sentence. It was a realization. I was still here, after all of it. The betrayal, the bruises, the divorce, the courtroom, the loss, the silence. I was still. I got dressed and walked to the small bookstore 2 blocks over. It used to be a hardware store. Now it smelled of old wood, new paper, and freshly brewed coffee from the cafe in the back. The girl behind the counter had red glasses and a warm voice. She didn't recognize me, which I liked. I asked if they had any books on meditation, or grief, or starting over. She pointed me to a shelf near the window. I browsed slowly. I didn't need answers. I wasn't looking for cliches or quick fixes. I just wanted something that understood quiet. I chose a slim book with a pale green cover. The title was soft, gentle, not trying too hard. I didn't read the back. I just held it in my hand like a stone from the shore. Smooth, cool, familiar. On my way out, I passed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board by the door. It read, "Garden Therapy Sessions for Women Reclaiming Their Space. Thursdays at 10 a.m. Registration not required." I don't know what made me write down the address. Maybe it was the word reclaiming. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was because I had spent so much of the last year losing things. My home, my son, my faith in what I thought was unbreakable. And I was ready to stop bleeding. The garden was tucked behind a small chapel, half hidden by tall lavender hedges and wind chimes made of copper pipes. A few women were already seated in a circle of folding chairs. Some older than me, some younger. None of them looked curious or judgmental, just present. I sat. A woman with silver curls and dirt under her fingernails introduced herself as Trina. She didn't ask anyone to speak unless they wanted to. She said the garden would do most of the work if we just let it. That day, I didn't say much. I listened. One woman talked about a daughter who hadn't called in 2 years. Another described a house that no longer felt like hers after her husband passed. Someone else, her voice barely above a whisper, said she woke up every day forgetting who she used to be before she became someone else's shadow. No one interrupted. No one fixed anything. We just sat. The breeze moved through the sunflowers. The soil smelled warm. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like a victim rehearsing her pain. I felt like a person remembering her voice. After the session, Trina handed me a pair of gloves and pointed to a patch of overgrown mint. I knelt down and started pulling, one root at a time. The leaves gave off a sharp scent, clean and medicinal. Every time I tugged a stem loose, I imagined another thread of the past loosening its grip on me. When I got home, there was a message on my phone. From the bank. Another withdrawal attempt. I sat down, breathed. Then I called the lawyer. She answered on the first ring. I told her I was ready to proceed with pressing charges against Patrick and Cynthia for financial fraud. That I had the documents, the statements, the notary reports. She paused, then said, "Good. That it was time. That I didn't have to be quiet anymore." I hung up and walked to the porch. The orchids were blooming again. One petal had fallen, curling slightly on the edge of the pot. I picked it up, held it in my palm. It was beautiful, but fragile. And it reminded me that healing isn't loud. It doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it starts in a chair beneath the sun, in a garden where no one interrupts. In a moment when the silence finally feels like your own. On Monday morning, I walked into the office of attorney Sophia Mendez with a folder under my arm and a pair of gloves in my pocket, still damp from the garden. Sophia looked up from her desk. She didn't smile, but she didn't have to. She had the kind of gaze that meant business, sharp, unflinching. Her office smelled faintly of lemon and wood polish, and her bookshelf was lined with thick case files and framed degrees. I handed her the folder and sat across from her without waiting for an invitation. Inside the folder were copies of every forged document I had collected over the past 3 months. The updated bank records, The trust revision Patrick and Cynthia had filed behind my back, the false signature, the notary affidavit signed by the same man who notarized my hospital admission papers, even though I had been unconscious that day. Sophia flipped through each page with mechanical precision. No gasp, no wide eyes, just small, efficient nods. When she closed the folder, she leaned back and folded her hands. She said we had more than enough to proceed. We started with a cease and desist letter. She said it was more symbolic than anything, a warning shot across the bow. But it gave us something official to timestamp the beginning of our action. That same afternoon, she emailed it directly to Patrick's legal counsel and requested a meeting. I asked if we should expect a countermove. She nodded once. And that's exactly what came 2 days later. Patrick's lawyer responded with a bland letter full of defensive legalese, denying everything, calling my claims unfounded, claiming I was emotionally unstable, that I was recovering from illness, that I was confused about the ownership of certain assets. But Sophia had anticipated it. She already had a sworn statement from Dr. Calloway confirming my full cognitive capacity post-recovery, as well as my psychiatric evaluation from last month. Both spotless, both recent. She attached them to our response. Then came the bank subpoenas. We requested the official transaction history of the estate account Patrick had quietly renamed under his own LLC. The statements showed withdrawals aligned exactly with the dates when I had been in the hospital. Nearly $70,000 spread across 4 transfers. One went directly to a luxury interior design firm. Another to a private equity fund I never approved. The last 2 to Cynthia's personal account. There was no way around it now. Sophia filed formal charges for financial fraud, trust tampering, and identity forgery. She also prepared a civil suit for damages. It all moved faster than I expected. By Friday, Patrick called me. I didn't answer. Then Cynthia left a voicemail. She tried to sound calm, but her voice cracked halfway through. She said we were family, that families don't take each other to court, that it was a misunderstanding, that she had receipts to explain everything. I deleted the message. Sophia advised me not to respond. Let them sweat. Let the paper trail speak. By the following week, I began getting calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. Distant cousins, old neighbors, Patrick's college roommate. All of them seemed to suddenly remember me. I knew why. The news had gotten out. Word always did. And I didn't care. The plan wasn't just about reclaiming my assets. It was about reclaiming the narrative. I met with a financial advisor Sophia trusted, a woman named Karina, with a calm voice and a spine of steel. She suggested transferring all current holdings into a new irrevocable trust under my sole control, separate from the Marston estate. She also advised freezing any accounts that Patrick or Cynthia had previously accessed, even as co-signers. I signed the documents without hesitation. Then I went a step further. I arranged a press release. Quiet. Clean. Just a short piece submitted to the local paper, under legal guidance. It detailed my filing against financial abuse by adult children, citing anonymous examples, and mentioned I would be funding a new foundation to protect elderly women in similar situations. Sophia said it was a bold move. I told her it wasn't bold. It was overdue. Within 72 hours of that article going live, I received 6 letters, all handwritten, all from women over 60. Each one shared a different version of the same story, disrespected, dismissed, robbed of dignity by their own blood. And I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this end in a quiet settlement, no behind-closed-doors apology, no whisper of, let's move on. I wanted this to be loud, public, documented, not because I needed revenge, but because I needed to look in the mirror and know that I didn't let them rewrite the truth. 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing was set. Sophia walked into the courthouse with her briefcase in one hand and her chin high. I followed in a charcoal suit and a scarf Nora had given me 5 years ago. It still smelled like her perfume. I liked that. Patrick sat at the other table, face pale, tie crooked. Cynthia didn't show. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I already knew what fear looked like in his eyes. I had seen it the day he realized I was no longer afraid of him. When the judge read the charges, there was no sound in the courtroom. Not a cough, not a whisper. Just the echo of my name, attached to words like plaintiff and claimant and owner. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an afterthought in my own life. I felt like a woman drawing a line in the sand. The day of the deposition, rain slapped against the courthouse windows like impatient fingers. It was steady, unrelenting. A fitting backdrop, I thought, for what was about to unfold. Patrick arrived 10 minutes late. His suit was wrinkled at the collar, his jaw clenched too tightly, and his once carefully styled hair looked hastily combed back. He didn't meet my eyes. Cynthia was beside him, but the air between them was brittle, like something long held together, now barely pretending to be intact. Sophia greeted them with a nod that barely qualified as polite. Her assistant, a young woman named Eliza, placed a thick stack of printed documents on the long oak table between us. Each page numbered, each page dated, each page damning. The room was closed off. Just the attorneys, a court reporter, and us. No public gallery, no media yet. But every word spoken was being transcribed, logged, and stored. Forever. The first 40 minutes were procedural, establishing names, confirming dates. Then Sophia leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. She asked about the transfers from the Marston estate account. Patrick shifted in his seat. He looked at his lawyer. A pause. Then he muttered that he had authorization. Sophia slid forward Exhibit C, my notarized signature, compared side by side with the forged one. The court reporter tapped each keystroke without missing a beat. Then came the questions about the revised trust. Patrick claimed I had verbally agreed. Sophia slid over the hospital admission records. ICU. Sedated. No verbal statements possible. Cynthia leaned back, her arms folded tightly across her chest, lips pressed so thin they nearly disappeared. Then Sophia turned to her. She asked about the invoice from Larch Interiors, luxury renovations billed during the same month I had been hospitalized. Cynthia glanced at Patrick. He didn't look back. She said she couldn't recall. Sophia handed her the next page. A signed confirmation of delivery for a crystal chandelier worth $17,000. Delivered to their new guest wing. Cynthia's signature was at the bottom. The silence in the room stretched so long, even the court reporter looked up. After 2 hours, the cracks were no longer just visible. They were gaping. Patrick's lawyer called for a break. They huddled in the hallway. I remained seated. So did Sophia. We didn't need to whisper. We had nothing to hide. When they returned, Patrick's voice was lower, almost hoarse. He tried a different route. He said it had all been done for efficiency, that he'd intended to pay it back, that estate funds often blurred during family transitions. Sophia didn't respond. She let the documents speak for themselves. Then she asked one final question. Why had he removed my name from the trust's notification system? Patrick didn't answer. Instead, his lawyer declared the deposition suspended and requested the remainder be conducted in writing. Sophia agreed, but the damage had been done. Later that night, Eliza called me. She said the whispers had already started inside the legal community. A former trustee being sued for fraud was newsworthy enough. But this wasn't just any trustee. It was a son. By morning, a small column appeared in the Tribune's digital edition. It didn't name names, but it didn't need to. The hints were clear. A lawsuit. alleged elder exploitation, an internal family rift. Cynthia's boutique social media page went dark within hours. Her business email bounced back with an out-of-office reply. And I heard from my neighbour, Darlene, that a couple from church had cancelled their dinner invitation to Patrick's family next week. Their carefully curated image was cracking. But the worst hadn't hit yet. The bank's internal investigation reached its conclusion. They determined that 4 of the transferred transactions had breached federal fraud guidelines due to the false signature on record. They froze Patrick's account. Sophia filed a motion to seize his assets tied to the estate until the court ruled. That same afternoon, I received a call from Cynthia's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She sounded shaken, said Cynthia had been crying non-stop, that Patrick was blaming everything on her, that he'd threatened to leave and take the remaining money with him. I listened without comment. There was nothing left to say. But what surprised me was what came next. Patrick called. For the first time in months, he used his voice. No lawyers, no script, just him. He said he never meant for things to go this far, that he thought I wouldn't notice, that I had so much already I wouldn't miss what he took. Then his voice cracked. He said Cynthia had convinced him it was justifiable, that family should invest in family, that the house needed upgrading, that I would forgive him like I always had. But something in his voice broke. He sounded like a man who'd finally realized there would be no rug big enough to sweep this under. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer revenge. I offered silence. Because at that point, silence said more than any lecture ever could. By the end of the week, Patrick's business partner pulled out of their joint venture. Their firm's website quietly removed his name from the executive page. The Financial Review Board opened an ethics complaint into his license, and Cynthia moved out. She filed a separate financial declaration, publicly distancing herself from the Marston estate mess. I read it through Sophia's email. Every word dripped with self-preservation, but it didn't matter, because by then, the public narrative had already shifted. The betrayed mother, the stolen estate, the broken trust. And underneath it all, a quiet, methodical dismantling of their house of lies. Not in one fiery explosion, but piece by piece, document by document, until the story they wrote for themselves collapsed into ash. And all that remained was the truth. My truth. It was early evening when the doorbell rang, not the loud kind. Not the urgent kind, just one firm ring, like whoever stood behind it knew exactly what they came for. I had been expecting it. For days, I had moved through my home in silence, waiting. Not with dread, but with a strange calm. I had spent the last 6 months pulling back every layer of their deception. Now, all that was left was this moment. I opened the door. Patrick stood on the porch, alone. His face was drawn, older than it should have been. The arrogance he wore like a second skin was gone. What remained looked more like a man hollowed out from the inside. He didn't speak right away, neither did I. The sun had dipped low, casting a soft gold across the hedges. A light breeze moved the corner of the welcome mat. Everything around us looked so ordinary. It made the reality between us even more cruel. Patrick finally cleared his throat. He said he came to talk, not to argue, not to explain, just talk. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I once taught him how to count coins, where he cried the day his dog ran away, where he whispered his dreams of building something better than his father ever did. He looked around like the house was unfamiliar. He said Cynthia had taken the apartment, that she was asking for her own lawyer now, that the press was calling him weekly, that the ethics board had suspended his license pending full review. He said everything was crumbling. Then he looked at me. And he said something I hadn't heard in years. He said he was sorry. He said he was sorry for assuming I was too weak to notice, too sentimental to fight back, too old to matter. He said he let money twist him into someone he didn't recognize, that Cynthia fed that hunger, but it had already lived inside him long before she came. I listened, not because I owed him that, but because I needed to hear it. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, just for the record. Then I spoke. I told him he broke more than trust. He had stolen not just assets, but memory, dignity, peace, all for a sense of power he never needed to prove to me. I reminded him of the day he graduated from law school, how I had sold my engagement ring to pay for his final semester, how I had driven overnight to watch him walk across that stage, how proud I had been, and how he used that degree to forge my name. He didn't deny it. He just looked at the floor. Then he asked if there was anything left to salvage, not between him and the courts, but between him and me. I looked at him, and I didn't see a son. I saw a man who had become a stranger by choice. I said I would never stop being his mother, but I had stopped being blind. I said love was not the same as permission. He nodded, slowly, like he already knew the answer. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. He said it was from Cynthia. She wanted no part of what came next. She wanted it on record that she had been misled, manipulated, and unaware. I didn't even open it. It wasn't about her anymore. Patrick stood. He looked around one last time. Then he turned back. He said he understood if I never spoke to him again, but he wanted me to know he would not contest the court's decision, that Sophia's team would have his full cooperation from here. I didn't move. I didn't speak again. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused. Then he whispered that he was sorry he became the kind of man who had to be stopped by his own mother, and then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, and I exhaled. Not relief, not sadness, something else, like the final line had been drawn, the last scene played. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything I had reclaimed. My voice, my spine, my legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, watched the night settle in. Not everything could be undone, but some things could be rewritten, not with revenge, but with truth. And that was enough. The first time I slept through the night, it surprised me. No dreams, no clenched fists, no sudden waking at 3 a.m. wondering what I had forgotten to guard. Just sleep. And when I woke, there was sunlight on the wall and the smell of toast from the kitchen. I sat up slowly, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and listened. Peace sounds like nothing at all. In the weeks after Patrick walked out that evening, my world didn't suddenly turn soft and golden. I still had meetings with Sophia's team. I still had documents to sign, properties to transfer, assets to untangle. The fallout was heavy, the headlines louder than I preferred. But I was no longer afraid. One morning, I stood in the center of the old warehouse Patrick tried to claim. It was mine again, empty now, stripped of machines and blueprints, but I could still feel the pulse of what it had been, what it could become. So I made a call, and then another. Within 3 weeks, the space had tenants, not corporations, not investors, women. Young, old, alone, ambitious. Some had been pushed out like me. Some just needed a place to begin. We called it the workshop, and it wasn't just a name. We taught skills, shared tools, provided counseling, connected lawyers to women fighting eviction, custody, wage theft. We opened a kitchen on the back lot, taught budgeting, taught confidence, taught silence was not virtue when someone tries to take what is rightfully yours. One afternoon, a woman about my age came in with a bruised arm and no ID. She had walked 10 blocks after being locked out by her grandson. She asked if we had a cot for the night. I made her tea, brought her my own pillow, and told her to rest. She cried harder over the kindness than she did over the betrayal. That was the world we were building, not a perfect one, but one where women who had been told they were too old, too broken, too invisible, could begin again. As for Patrick, he kept his word. He stayed quiet in court. He gave Sophia everything: the revised will, the fake documents, the money trails. Last I heard, he had taken a job out of state, something small, nothing that required a license. Cynthia never resurfaced. I didn't write. I didn't ask. Forgiveness was never the point. I hadn't fought to welcome him back. I fought to welcome myself home. My garden bloomed that spring: yellow tulips, red azaleas, the kind I hadn't planted in years. Sometimes I'd sit with the women who came to the workshop and tell them about seeds, how they sleep under frost, how they look dead until one day they don't. They always understood. One afternoon, Sophia stopped by. She brought lemon pie and a folder, said she was taking a break from law and might want to consult part-time. I told her she'd always have a desk here, not because I owed her, but because we shared something deeper than any contract. Trust rebuilt by fire. Before she left, she hugged me, the kind of hug that says more than words. When the door closed behind her, I looked around, at the walls lined with books, the tools hung neatly, the light falling on the floor like honey. And I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who sat in silence at her son's table, letting shame swallow her words. She was gone now. In her place stood someone older, wiser, not harder, but unshakable. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally, truly come into my own. If you've ever had to reclaim something that was taken from you, your voice, your power, your peace, I hope this story reminded you that it is never too late. Age is not weakness, silence is not surrender, and you are not alone. Let me know if you've walked a similar path or found strength in unexpected places. Your voice too deserves to be heard.